This is Land of Havilah, Nehemiah 5. During the building of the wall, there arose another problem. Nehemiah had to deal with an economic crisis as well. Verse 1. Then there arose a great cry of the people and of their wives against their brothers, the Jews. For there were that said, We, our sons and our daughters, are many. Let us get grain, that we may eat and live. There were also some that said, We're mortgaging our fields and our vineyards and our houses. Let us get grain because of the famine. There were also some who said, We've borrowed money for the king's tribute, using our fields and our vineyards as collateral. Yet now our flesh is as the flesh of our brothers, our children as their children. Behold, we bring our sons and daughters into bondage to be servants, and some of our daughters have been brought into bondage. It's also not in our power to help it, because other men have our fields and our vineyards. Comment in verse 1, the poor among the Jews were crying out against the rich. In verses 2 and 3, the poor had no grain because of a general famine. Likely there was drought. The general shortage of produce sent the price of food through the roof. The Jews with lesser means had to mortgage their land to buy food or get loans using their land as collateral, or more desperately, they used their sons and daughters as collateral. When they couldn't pay, their creditors took possession of their sons and daughters as servants. In verse 5, some families had already lost their daughters. It was becoming a widespread problem. In verse 4, with the poor running low on cash, they couldn't pay the king's tax. If tax revenue from Judea drops off, it'll look like rebellion at a time when they're already being accused of it. Their enemies have already told the king, quote, Now let it be known to the king that if the city is rebuilt and the walls are finished, they will not pay tribute, custom, tax, or toll, and it'll be detrimental to the revenue of the kings, Ezra 4:13. Therefore, there's a political necessity to do something. Beyond the question of tax rebellion, Yahweh's already commanded the Jews in the law of Moses to help out the poor. In Leviticus 25:35-43, he said to uphold the poor. It was okay to require servitude in payment of debt, but Hebrew servants should be treated well by Yahweh's law, more like brothers than slaves. There should be no taking of interest from fellow Hebrews or profiting from loans. Hebrews should be released from servitude every 7 years in the year called the Shemitah, translated year of release, and Hebrews should get all their land back every 50 years in the year of Jubilee. The overall principle was Leviticus 25:35, quote, If your brother has become poor, you shall uphold him, end quote. Nehemiah says, verse 6, I was very angry when I heard their cry and these words. Then I consulted with myself and contended with the nobles and the rulers, and said to them, You exact usury, every one of his brother. I held a great assembly against them. Comment, usury is the charging of excessive interest. In the law, there should be no interest at all when it comes to a fellow Hebrew. Leviticus 25:36 and 37. Verse 8. I said to them, We, after our ability, have redeemed our brothers, the Jews, that were sold to the nations. And would you even sell your brothers, and should they be sold to us? Then they held their peace and found not a word to say. Comment in verse 8, Nehemiah spoke to some of the profiteering culprits. He said some of the kind-hearted Jews, apparently including himself, had purchased Jews from Gentiles just to free them. Now he says to the profiteers, You want us to purchase our own people from you as well? Verse 9. Also I said, The thing that you do is not good. Shouldn't you walk in the fear of our God because of the reproach of the nations, our enemies? I likewise, my brothers and my servants, lend them money and grain. Please let us stop this usury. Comment, he says, Some of us are lending without a profit like we should, so do the right thing yourselves and stop profiteering. Verse 11. Please restore to them even today their fields, their vineyards, their olive groves, and their houses, also the 100th part of the money, and of the grain, the new wine, and the oil that you are charging them. Then they said, We will restore them, and will require nothing of them. We will do so, even as you say. Then I called the priest and took an oath of them that they would do according to this promise. Comment in verse 11, Nehemiah didn't call for an all-out cancellation of debts, but he did call for restoration of all farms and houses, which will give the poor a chance to get back on their feet. In verse 12, the profiteers agreed, some of them being priests. Verse 13, Also I shook out my lap and said, So may God shake out every man from his house and from his labor that doesn't perform this promise, even be he shaken out and emptied like this. Comment: Nehemiah says, if you don't keep your promise, may God empty you out. May he make you lose your homes and incomes. Still in verse 13. All the assembly said, Amen, and praised Yahweh. The people did according to this promise. Moreover, from the time that I was appointed to be their governor in the land of Judah, from the 20th year even to the 32nd year of Artaxerxes the king, that is 12 years, I and my brothers have not eaten the bread of the governor. Comment: from the time Nehemiah arrived and for at least 12 years after, none of the Jewish leaders took pay from tax collections. They had a right to do so in exchange for their service, but they didn't. Coming up, the governors before Nehemiah did take pay. Verse 15. But the former governors who were before me were supported by the people and took bread and wine from them, plus 40 shekels of silver. Yes, even their servants ruled over the people, but I didn't do so because of the fear of God. Yes, I also continued in the work of this wall. We didn't buy any land. All my servants were gathered there to the work. Comment: Nehemiah didn't seek the security of purchasing farmland for himself. He kept his servants at work building the wall. He gave himself and his servants to full-time service. He must have had money from somewhere, but it wasn't from tax revenue or farming. Verse 17. Moreover, there were at my table of the Jews and the rulers 150 men, in addition to those who came to us from among the nations that were around us. Now that which was prepared for one day was 1 ox and 6 choice sheep. Also fowls were prepared for me, and once in 10 days a store of all sorts of wine. Yet for all this I didn't demand the governor's pay, because the bondage was heavy on this people. Remember to me, my God, for good all that I have done for this people. Comment: it sounds as if Nehemiah was independently wealthy before he arrived. In verse 17, he had 150 plus men at his table, some of them Jews, some of them high-ranking that he supported, and others that were Gentile servants. He didn't think the community should bear the burden of any of it. Nehemiah 6 is next.